Hey, this is Brett from the FNGoodMusic blog on Instagram, and I'm your new host for the Music That Matters podcast, which is brought to you by the Society of Sound Music Media. I hope you
So
enjoy.
my town is a town of 800 people. We're
Hmm.
on the edge of cornfields. So like if you walk a block south of my house, you're on dirt roads and it's just nothing. And like the way to describe it is it's so flat that at the 4th of July when all these little towns are having their fireworks displays, you can see on the horizon all these different fireworks displays from miles and miles away
That's
cuz
incredible.
there's nothing in the way, man. It's just nothing.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So how have you found it, starting your songwriting journey, I guess, later than most people would?
Right. So like I always joke that I don't have I don't have any songs about, crushes or first
Right.
loves,
Yeah.
right? I don't have a big breakup album or two or three,
Hmm.
right? Like
Yeah. Gets right to
I
the
was
point.
right. So I kind of started as I don't know, an adult songwriter from the very beginning because I already had three kids and my husband and I
Hmm.
were kind of set up in Iowa at the time. So so yeah, I kind of dove into like the meat and potatoes of adult human life in a small town. That's kind of what I like to write about.
Right. So what do you think drove you to start songwriting as opposed to, just kind of sticking around as a musician?
Yeah, totally. It kind of happened organically and I didn't really see it coming, but then when I look back, I can totally see all of the pieces were all there. I just
Hmm.
kind of needed to put them all together. So, first, like as a young person, I was a very avid journal writer. Like I was an obsessed journaler.
Hmm.
Like if I had a minute free, I was writing. And then I was also a musician, but I never saw those two things going together. And then when I was kind of getting back into music after a little break, like in my 20s, I started, I joined a cover band and a folk duo.
Hmm.
And we were playing folk covers and like playing farmers markets and kind of having a great time. And it was kind of, I didn't know that I was getting there, but as I was playing those cover songs and playing those folk songs that everybody loves, I just got to a day once where I'm like, these songs aren't my story. Like, I love these songs. I think they're amazing, but they don't say what I want to say. And so I really kind of, it just kind of dawned on me one day like, I think I need to write my own story now. And when that first impulse hit, it was very much like a test kitchen. Like, it doesn't cost any money at all to try and write a song. Like, why not just try it? I don't have, it's like, there's no grade attached. So I tried to just see if I could write a song. And I wrote that first song. And I tell everybody it was kind of like wildfire hitting me. Like I just could not stop. Like once I started writing songs, I could not stop. And looking back, I was a writer beyond just like I wasn't just journaling about my day for all of those years. Like I was creative writing essentially. And then I just put music to it. And I think the two things found each other. And kind of this is the natural progression of how it all went down, which
Hmm.
I'm really glad that it all went down that way.
Yeah, well, it almost seems like you were basically training yourself for this moment, in all those years of journaling. And,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine how many, like potential songs might be in those journals that
Oh my
just
gosh.
ended up being thoughts.
Right? I mean, yeah, like cuz again, like I was as a young person in high school and college, I was just writing constantly and I thought it was just no big deal. Like I just thought that's just a way to capture what in the world's going on in my head all the time.
Hmm.
And turns out that's kind of what songwriting is, capturing what's up in your head all the time and then just
Right.
putting it to music.
So have your interests always been more focused in folk and country, or was your interest as a younger artist, or even before you were, I guess, a songwriter,
Mm-hmm.
uh, did you have many different influences, or has it always kind of been centered on this country folk?
That's a great question. Yeah, like growing up in Southern California, I would have like I hated country music. I thought
Mm.
it was so lame. Like I always grew up, like in my high school years were in the mid to late 90s. And so I was into, alternative rock. Like I liked REM and I like U2 and I liked the Cranberries and we were big Queen fans at my house. And so, like Cyndi Lauper and Madonna, the stuff that they play on the radio. I really thought that's the musical universe that I knew about.
Hmm.
So when I learned that there was this other group of people, like these other kinds of songwriters who were sometimes hidden behind the person who made the song famous, um, when I started discovering that some people's songs weren't actually their songs, that this other group of people had written them, and
Mm.
that somebody else had made them famous, not necessarily those bands that I mentioned, those guys are writing their own stuff. But um, but anyways, I'm like, oh, there's a thing called a songwriter. What's that about?
Mm.
And it took me down a rabbit hole that really did take me into a country folk universe that I
Hmm.
didn't think I liked at all. But what I really love about country and folk is that country music has its roots in story songs, like songs that have a beginning, a middle, and an end, like a
Hmm.
progression of a narrative. And that really speaks to me. And I write songs like that. Like if you go to a pop universe, there's not necessarily like a through line story all the time, or
Hmm.
there's some, kick-ass hooky chorus, which I would love to have. I would love to have a kick-ass hooky chorus, but the intent of the songwriter isn't necessarily let me walk you through what happened when my wife left and my dog died and my truck got stolen,
Hmm.
and but country does that. And I think that that's kind of why all of a sudden I have this newfound appreciation and love for folk and country artists, and writers in particular.
Mm. That's amazing. Do you think that there's any one specific artist that you can recall that really kind of brought you into this world
Yeah,
of
totally.
country? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I mean, if you ever listen to any of the other interviews I've ever done,
Hmm.
or written or audio, I always mention Daryl Scott. And
Mm.
Daryl Scott is kind of the person who showed up early on in my songwriting evolution as someone who was one of those guys who was performing and touring on his own, but had also written songs that were made famous by other people like Travis Tritt and the Dixie Chicks. Um, and he was very, very inspirational and very foundational for my first kind of education as a songwriter. And he still is in many ways.
Yeah, and on your new album, Sweetheartland,
Yeah.
you have the song John Prine.
Yeah.
And I was
Right.
wondering, did you write that before he passed or after he passed? What was the timing of that?
I did write it before John Prine
Mm.
passed.
Wow.
Um, when he passed away early on in COVID last year, I was kind of super devastated because when I wrote that song and I put it on the album, I really wanted it to be like an homage and a tribute and a thank you to him while he was still with us. When he passed away, and the record was already in the can for like probably 6 or 7 months before that time. When he passed away and I knew that this song was on the record, I had a lot of mixed feelings. Like I felt kind of guilty, like I should have released the thing, man. Like I should have honored him and honored the record earlier. But now that I have it on there and he's not with us anymore, I'm really thankful that that song's on there, because I always get to think about him. And he's one of those guys that I knew about, but I didn't know about him until much later in life. And it was Todd Snyder, who I was a big fan of, who kept mentioning John Prine. And I finally am like, well, I love Todd Snyder, so what's the deal with this John Prine character? And that's kind of also what's cool about songwriting, is that songwriters are speaking to each other and influencing each other and like helping each other through their own like artistic realms. And so it's really wonderful to kind of connect the dots to see, who's who's hanging with who's listening to who. And then you start listening back to their work and you're like, oh, I can totally hear how
Hmm.
he was listening to so and so. So,
I think John Prine has that effect on a lot of people, especially after he passed. I think that, you know, I started personally hearing about him a lot more. I had heard about him through Angel from Montgomery and,
yeah,
you know, like
right.
his big songs like that. But after he passed, I had seen so many people starting to listen to John Prine and really
Hmm.
talking about John Prine.
Hmm.
And I think that a lot of people had that same kind of relationship where, you know, like he was there and they knew about him, but they didn't really like know him. And
Right.
then once he passed, people were really able to look into his work and see how amazing and underrated he was as a songwriter.
And so influential. You know, he's one
Hmm.
of those guys that we always say he's a songwriter's songwriter. It's what the songwriters are all listening to. I think the same thing happened when Guy Clark passed away. You know, Guy Clark was this monster songwriter, and in the songwriting universe, he's beloved and revered. But I think the general public doesn't know Guy Clark nearly as much as they probably should, because how he influenced and like continued this artistic conversation that bigger artists, like more public artists, have been able to continue because they were listening to a Guy Clark or they were listening to a John Prine, which is that's why it's so awesome to be in the arts, because the community you find there is collaborative, and it's like no one's taking from anybody. Everybody's just making each other better. Like in the best artistic realm, everybody's making each other better, and I think those guys are great examples of like creating community around which everyone's kind of pushing their writing to the next level, taking it deeper, listening to each other. I think that's super cool.
I totally agree, and I think that it's unfortunate sometimes when, you know, that kind of collaborative like inspiring energy that comes from
Mhm.
artist to artist turns into a competition a little bit,
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
becomes more competitive than
yeah,
kind of like, you know, holding each other's hand as you both go forward.
yeah,
And I
man.
think that these days it has become more about, you know, who's doing what and how can I beat that, and instead of kind of just lifting each other up.
Totally. Totally. And like when you strip away maybe like the marketplace or the charts or like CDs sold, strip all that stuff away, you're just left with a bunch of people who love music and who love trying to make it as best they possibly can. And that's not really competitive. That's, like
Hmm.
you said, that's collaborative.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, and I think another artist that I always think of in that John Prine, Guy Clark type of category is also
mhm.
Townes Van Zandt.
Totally.
And I mean, in the last 2 years, he's had a serious. I mean, I'm not much of a musician. I'm not great. You know, I think I've recently made the transition from guy who plays guitar to musician.
All right. That's awesome.
But Townes Van Zandt is really like, you know, he blows my mind,
Blows your mind.
and he's not nearly as popular as he really needs to be.
He's another one of those names who constantly comes up in conversation about an
Hmm.
innovative, inspirational, like colleague that we're all trying to emulate and like
Hmm.
learn from, because his work is so amazing. And like you said, he's kind of under the radar even now, even still.
Hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And so, what would you say your favorite song from your new album is?
Oh, shoot.
Do you have one?
Yeah. Um, so I was listening, I was trying to plan for this interview, and of course my first answer is Woman Like Me. I really love Woman Like Me. I'm very proud of it. It's been around with me for a long time, so it's kind of like an old friend. I always love it, and I love how we did it on the record. But I'm going to change my answer today because now is now, right?
Hmm.
So we're just going to honor now. And I really love Dog Like You. I'm just going to say Dog Like You is my favorite song. And it's been interesting, when records get released, I tried to predict what would be the thing that people would hang on to, and I got the predictions all wrong.
I don't think predictions can ever go right in that sense.
I know, right? You just have to let people love what they're going to love. And I love the whole record, so it delights me to no end to hear how people receive these songs. But I did not predict the right choices when I thought, what were they going to love about this record?
I love the record too, and something that I noticed about it was how amazingly organized it was. I thought that, from first track to last track,
Mhm,
there's a certain flow about it, and it goes up and down from, more folk to
mhm.
more of a rock and roll vibe, and then it comes back down a little bit, and it keeps this, you know, consistent and kind of seamless flow in it. Was that, intentional, or did you kind of just put them all in?
Thank you. Thank you for noticing that. I credit Jesse Thompson and Zach Smith for that part of the project.
Hmm.
Honestly, I came with a lot of raw material. Um, and those guys brought a vision to the whole project that I think I was just too close to the material to be able, like you said, like create this seamless movement from song to song. Those guys, those guys did that. And I'm so
Mm.
thankful that they did because again, if I had to predict what I thought the sequence of the record was going to be, it wasn't that, but they totally nailed it. And I'm so thankful.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I do love a lot of country music. I wouldn't define myself as, it's not one of my favorite genres,
Right.
but something that I think that, and I'm not sure if I falsely stereotype country in this way, but I feel like a lot of country music tends to be a little bit down and out,
Mm,
you're talking about your troubles, and it's not really, it's kind of almost in a despaired way. There's not
mm,
so much hope in it a lot of the time, but I
right.
find that on your album there's a lot of self-assuring lyrics, especially on Woman Like Me. I think that there's, this tremendous confidence that you bring to it. And I mean, like, where does that come from?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, just so the listeners know, I have a lot of sad sack songs, so don't you worry. But on this record, I'm so glad you noticed that because on this record, that was an intentional choice. The intentional choice I made for this project was having more fun,
Mm,
having more fun, feeling like I had permission to explore like a brighter side of my songwriting because my previous record, Three Black Crows, is very squarely a singer songwriter record, and it has some pretty great sad songs on there. And so, yeah, I just wanted to expand my ability to kind of have a more whole approach to what my like songwriter identity was. I've had this kind of darker identity, and now this was an intentional choice to make it a little stronger, make it a little more playful and brighter. And I'm glad I did. Songwriters. I'll just speak for myself. I can't speak for everybody, but like for a long time, I thought to myself, like the only way that a song is going to break through or mean something or be of value is if it explores like the hardest, darkest parts of life. There's definitely a place for those songs like to really help. I mean, I love me a sad song, but like my evolution as a writer and a listener has been there's also a really important role that fun songs play and strong songs play, and I
mm.
love those songs as a listener, so why not like honor that and put an album out that's got that stuff on there too.
And I think What Were You Thinking kind of has all of that, that smart, witty type of confident, and, almost like there's almost like a certain sarcasm to it, like with what were you thinking?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I really that I mean that song, I think you're right. I think it embodies a lot of it. It embodies kind of a lot of different emotions, like joking, also anger, also like what were you thinking exactly, right? And I don't have a lot of songs that kind of live in that realm, and I'm really pleased with how what were you thinking turned out. Before it turned into what it is on the record. I mean, I just had it in my set thinking it's not a big deal. Like some people like it. I didn't play it all the time. It was kind of like, I don't know what to do with this song, but it always cracked me up. I always thought it was super funny.
That's really funny that you say that because like it was actually it was a standout song to me.
Thank you.
The I can't remember the bottleneck blonde or the
Bottle Blonde. Yeah.
bottle blonde, right? Yeah, that that little verse I thought it, cracked me up.
Thank you. Thank you. It cracked me up when I was writing it. So that's why I always liked it. Maybe my delivery was off in those early years with that song, but I'm really glad we put it on the record because it still cracks me up. I still think it's funny.
Yeah, and it was a little bit unexpected for me because I know that this is a more recent album, and with COVID going on, I kind of was expecting
Hmm.
a bit more of a sulky type of vibe with it. But
Yeah.
you really brought my spirits up, and I think that to anybody who listens to this, I think that they'll kind of take these woes of quarantine and kind of turn it into maybe like a bit of like a self-deprecating type of
Yeah.
humor almost.
I hope so. So this record was completely done by the end of 2019.
Mm,
It was going to be released in 2020. So it was pretty much in the can before COVID hit. And so I had planned for world domination in 2020. That didn't exactly work out. The good news is it didn't work out for anybody except for
mm,
COVID. That was the only thing that got world domination. Um, and when I thought about releasing it, that was kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to release it now. To me, it feels like a breath of fresh air. It feels like turning over a new leaf. And in Nebraska, I don't know what it's like in New Jersey, but like spring is in full force right
oh
now.
yeah, spring has
And so
sprung here.
it feels like a waking up album, like kind of like shaking off the dust and like rolling the windows down. I hope that that's what people hear when they
Mm,
hear it, that it isn't a dark album. It's a really, hopefully, a fun, free sounding album.
right. So how did COVID, like, what kind of adjustments do you think you had to make from this idea of quote unquote world domination
Right.
to kind of the opposite and just being locked inside?
Yeah. A lot, man. You know, uh especially at before COVID. um I know that, like, before COVID, I got a lot of joy and delight touring around the United States, playing songs for my friends, like having this intimate conversation with an audience. Like, I love recording and I love making albums. I love performing probably more than that. I really love that human connection.
Mhm.
So when I lost that, I kind of fell into a state of mourning. I think a lot of artists did. Then a lot of artists chose to pivot and do a lot of like online stuff,
Mhm.
um, distanced, on their computers. And I love doing that too, but it didn't feed me the same way that like the human element of music usually does. So I
Mhm.
kind of stepped back from a lot of performing. I really didn't do very much like from my basement shows.
Mhm.
What I did do though was dive deep into songwriting. Um, it wasn't like there was a temptation from COVID to just kind of like completely shut down and just, you know, go dormant for a little while, hibernate, see what was going to happen. But a friend of mine, Bob Hillman, songwriter from San Francisco, early on in pandemic, put together a scrappy group of songwriters from all over the United States and planned these Monday night songwriting sessions. So I've been writing pretty consistently and meeting with this songwriting group on Zoom, thanks to
Wow.
Zoom, every Monday since a year ago, April. So that's been really, really vital and important. And I cherish that work that we've done. I sought out a lot of creative opportunities online. Like, if you know Peter Himmelman, he's a great songwriter who I love very much, amazing performer. And he did some online courses, and I took those. And like anytime I had an opportunity to like dive into creativity, I found a lot of help and rest and like inspiration by being in those creative communities. And it was it was how I got through, quite honestly.
And so, I guess without revealing too much about the lyrics you wrote, did you find any commonalities and themes between, in the lyrics that you wrote, or were you kind of going off of Sweetheartland and come and still keeping that high
Mm.
energy, or was it tough?
It was tough, man. Like we were writing in real time. So a lot
Mm-hmm.
of us were kind of like processing what was happening in the world from week to week. That's not to say that there weren't times of levity, but I think that most of our songwriting as a group, and these guys are amazing. I took a lot of inspiration that like to go back to that collaborative spirit. I've
Mm-hmm.
spent a lot of time with this collaborative spirit where I've really tried to learn from my fellow songwriters, listen to what they're doing, try and pick up some of their tricks. But we were processing the world in real time and we were writing
Mm-hmm.
about it in real time a lot of times. So that also bearing witness to one another. Who knows whether any of these songs will be, you know, going out, on tour with us, but
Mm-hmm.
they sure did like help us manage this journey from week to week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that a lot of artists, well, something that's interesting is that throughout all of 2020 and even up to now, all of the music that has been released, I haven't seen so much music that
Yeah.
really directly talks about COVID.
Right.
It almost seems like people are trying to like pretend that it's not happening or hasn't happened, or, just trying to stay status quo with
Yeah.
their songwriting style and not being super present in this moment. So I would love to hear on tour that music.
Dude, I know I'm supposed to be promoting my own record right now, but Bob Hillman
Yeah.
made an EP called Inside and Terrified, and it is a COVID EP. So, mental note, go to Bandcamp, listen
Okay.
to Inside and Terrified because that's straight up COVID. No hiding behind any pretend version of what in the world's going on.
That that's good.
Yeah.
I need some honesty these days.
Yeah, man. Same. Me too. Me too.
So, do you have any plans for the future? What are you looking at for next steps? Because I mean, this summer things are opening up a bit more. Do you
Mhm.
have ideas for what, you want the latter part of 2021 to look like?
It's a great question. I think the short answer is not yet. I I don't know about you, but like my long-term planning skills are really rusty.
Hmm.
Like I feel like this year has taught us to only look slightly into the future, not deeply into the future, and I think I've like latched onto that. You know, week to week, let's see what happens type of philosophy.
Hmm.
So I will say I played my first live show a couple of weeks ago, went down to Kansas City, played a show like in an outdoor patio garden. It was absolutely beautiful. And I was reminded of like how amazing a night can be when you share it with people and like hold this space for one another. Like what I love about live music is that it's like magic you can only capture for the 90 minutes of the show, and if you weren't there, sorry, like
Hmm.
then it's gone. And I know that people use phones to capture stuff, but it's not the same. So I was reminded of how awesome playing live was last weekend, and I would love nothing more than to build my calendar up again. Am I a little gun shy? Yeah, I'm a little gun shy, but that's really what I would love to do is like enter back into conversation in those magical rooms and those magical moments. Um, with people I haven't seen in over a year and new people too, hopefully who find me because of Sweetheartland. That's
Hmm.
the actual record I'm supposed to be promoting.
Well, yeah, and to everybody listening, I definitely think you should take a listen to Sweetheartland and make sure
Thank
you
you.
start at the top and go straight to the bottom.
Start at the
Don't put on
top, go
that
straight to the
shuffle.
bottom, man.
That's how it should be done with this record, at least, I think.
Thank you. Thank you.
So when you got back to that live show, did you feel like it was rusty at all, or was it kind of just muscle memory back to usual?
It would be so cool if I said I just nailed it, but it wouldn't be true. It did. I was
Butterflies?
like, I was like, once I got to the second set, I'm like, okay, I think I've got my sea legs, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Um, it was fantastic. It was rusty, but it was real. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the audience, that might have been their first live show coming back. So the energy in the room was just like bananas. It wasn't a room, it was outdoors. Don't worry, anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It was outdoors. It was bananas. Like we were all just in a moment of celebration. So the fact that, I was rusty and didn't nail everything was totally fine because we were all there together. And like, you know, songwriters, I mean, people who are performers, and maybe you know this as a performer, is that there's just kind of this insatiable desire to be on a microphone and sing songs for people. So I'm like halfway through the show, my banter's going too long. And I'm like, you guys, I haven't had a microphone like this. It's like if you give a mouse a cookie. Like I just, it's going to be real hard to pull back.
You should
But
pick
it
up
was
a stand-up
awesome.
routine.
Seriously. It was exactly like they didn't come to hear me tell stupid jokes. They actually came to hear songs. Get back to the music.
Right. Well, I mean, personally, I can't wait to get back to live shows. I just booked my first concert tickets, and it's
Yeah, man.
only, and it's all the way for December.
Where is it? Where'd you get? What'd you get?
So I got for the Bowery Ballroom in New York City, a new artist. Well, he's not super new. I think that he's recently blossoming a bit more. He's been
All
around
right.
for a bit. His name's Adam Weiner, but he goes by the name Low Cut Connie.
Low cut
And
Connie.
he is like I always like to think of him as like an Elton John if Elton John was the pianist for the Rolling Stones. So
All
it's kind of
right.
like he's got the showmanship and the flair, but he kind of sticks to that rhythm and blues type of style. So
Yeah,
that's
man.
I can't help but think of that.
That is so awesome. Congratulations. Well
Thank
done.
you. It's
Yeah, I mean, that's what I told myself. Like, I told myself during COVID, I'm like, no more of this waiting for them to come near me garbage. Like, I'm going to drive this country wherever in order to see my favorite artists. No
Mhm.
more putting it off. That goes for everybody listening too. No more putting it off. Just find your favorite humans, buy a plane ticket. I know it seems weird, and just go and see the show.
I totally agree. Got
Totally.
to do it. You got to do what you got to
You
do.
just got to do it.
Yep. And so so I think we had fairly different COVID experiences. I live in a pretty densely populated
Hmm.
area, and so I felt very isolated, but
Hmm.
I still had neighbors and like people that were very close and a lot of people around and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But I'd imagine that living out in Nebraska is a bit more isolating. But I wonder if as you're looking out I mean, like, I don't know if I have this completely wrong, but looking out into the sprawling hills of Nebraska, um, is there a certain beauty to that? If
Oh,
that's even what it looks like, I'm not even sure.
it's there are some hills, but very few. It's
uh,
mostly flat. If I had to describe it, it's so my town is a town of 800 people. We're
mhm,
on the edge of cornfields. So like if you walk a block south of my house, you're on dirt roads and it's just nothing. And like the way to describe it is it's so flat that at the 4th of July, when all these little towns are having their fireworks displays, you can see on the horizon all these different fireworks displays from miles and miles away
that's
because
incredible.
there's nothing in the way, man. It's just nothing.
That's really
It's a
amazing.
it really is amazing. It's an acquired taste, I will say. It's
Mhm.
not exactly what people imagine to be beautiful, but if you hang around long enough, there's something really, really quietly kind of badass beautiful about this place.
And I think you have kind of like an objective perspective on this because growing up in Southern California, you've
Hmm.
had both.
Yeah.
And so this isn't something that you've always known and it's the only
Mm.
thing this is
Right.
something that's more new that
Yeah.
you can really like look in perspective and say, well, I could be somewhere else in a more in closer to a city and
Hmm.
but you're right here. And
I
so I
know.
think that you have this perspective of
Yeah.
having both.
Yeah, like, like growing up in Southern California, there's the ocean. It's very beautifully manicured everything, It's got sprinklers. There's a real wow factor to the natural beauty in California. Even on the East Coast, I mean, there's a real wow factor. Or New York City, for example, the metro area. There's a wow factor to
Hmm.
that monster lands like cityscape, right?
Hmm.
Nebraska, it takes a little time to notice because like the changes in color are really, really subtle, and you have to kind of keep your eyes open, and you got to kind of focus a little longer and like sit with it a little longer in order to see like this huge expanse. There's just really subtle beauty there that,
Hmm.
again, doesn't have a wow factor that you think of like when you think Grand Canyon or Florida Keys or something like that, but it really is something quite spectacular.
I think so too. And I think that, as you spend more time there, I think that it would, over time you would begin to slowly get that wow factor. Whereas, when you
Yeah.
walk out of Penn Station in New York City and you see the Empire State Building and you're like,
Yeah.
whoa, but when you're out in the country and you can just kind of be there every single day, and then over time you're just kind of like, wow, like
Yeah.
you breathe in the air and you see the colors change a little bit, and like
Hmm.
from week to week, month to month, and you just see the differences. And
Yeah.
it's also much, and there's a lot more nature, and it's not so man-made, sprinklers and front lawns and stuff like
Totally.
that. Yeah.
Totally. And as a songwriter, like that's what I've really come to appreciate and love about this landscape is that, there's just space, and there's
Hmm.
space to create too. Like, you know, there isn't a wow factor. Like one of the funny jokes we always have in Nebraska, like our unofficial slogan for the state is Nebraska, bring something to do.
Hmm.
Because there's not a hell of a lot to do. And as a songwriter, that feels like literally sky's the limit. Like write whatever you want.
Hmm.
I don't hear a lot of other songwriting voices like in my area. It's not like there's music coming out of every window. And so I'm just being flooded by whatever pressure to sound like this person or try to
Hmm.
write a song like this. It's kind of like, what do you feel like writing today? And then you just do it. And that's kind of where Sweetheartland came from. I think that the songs on Sweetheartland, I wasn't trying to emulate anything. I wasn't trying to do anything except for just listen to my own artistic voice that wanted to write something about whatever, waiting
Hmm.
tables, dropping pie, and trying to like hang on when life feels tough, right? Like
Right.
I don't know if that's cool or not, but I thought it was cool.
I don't think that cool is really even I don't think it really, it's not that it doesn't matter, because that's not just the best way to say it. I just don't
Sure.
think that it should even be in that perspective. Like, what is cool? Cool is completely subjective. So
Totally subjective.
exactly. So there are so many people who don't relate to this cool
Hmm.
that everybody thinks of when they're trying to sound like something else. But there's some, like, I think cool is to each their own, and it's what relates to them.
I hope so. And I hope like the best artists are encouraging newer artists to just like do you, right? Like listen
Hmm.
to your own calling when it comes to what what lights you up. What do you want to write about? Because it's really a losing game when it comes to like trying to emulate somebody else's work or line up with what we think might be cool. Because like you said, that target's always moving and nobody can agree on what's cool. So
Exactly.
just do what you think's cool, everybody.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about this, this lyrical inspiration that comes from the scenery and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a certain musicality that comes from it as well, in guitar style or
Mm.
drum patterns or,
Mm.
anything?
That's a great question. Well, if you've listened to Sweetheartland, like I said, I came with some pretty like raw material. Most of the songs you hear on Sweetheartland were pretty much like you got the raw template lines up pretty well with the produced version. There are a couple of songs where Zach and Jesse really came in and helped me shape material that I wasn't very sure about. And what I really wanted them, what I really loved working about with Zach and Jesse was their ability to hear the whole song. Because I'm typically, most days, I'm just a person with a guitar. Like, I can't necessarily hear the whole production in my head. And those guys brought their musical wisdom and expertise to say, this is where I hear like the drums helping elevate this piece of music. Like, this is where I hear the guitar or whatever harmonica making this even stronger. And so I really talk about this production as a collaboration, because without their input and musicality, I don't know if the songs would have gotten to where they are on the record.
And do the three of you kind of have similar interests? How did you find Zach and Jesse to really be these, the right people to work with?
Yeah, so I knew Zach Smith. He's one half of the band Smoothhound Smith. I met Zach at a songwriting workshop in Colorado years ago, and we've kind
Mm,
of kept in touch and seen each other off and on, like when we've been touring or on the road. And when I wanted to make like kind of a harder hitting record, he was the first person I thought of. And the reason why I thought of him is because his musical aesthetic is very different from mine. And I
mm.
really wanted him to bring what he knows best into this music.
And what are
And then
those
Zach, yeah,
differences that you see? Sorry. What are, in
like
the, yeah.
he's really knowledge. He's rhythm and blues.
Mm-hmm.
He's got rock and roll chops. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I live very squarely in singer songwriter, maybe country, but I don't have a lot of those skills like that he does when it comes to like putting a rhythm section underneath a song. I just
Mm-hmm.
don't. And so I really wanted him to come in here and say, this is what I would do with this music. And then he was awesome enough to bring Jesse Thompson in on the project. And together, like the three of us were just a perfect mesh. And I think most of it had to do with we're nothing alike.
Hmm.
Like, I'm very much the songwriter, so my job was like protect the words at all cost, everybody. And then those guys were able to say, okay, this is what we can do to elevate this music. And I just cherished what they brought, because like I said, like what I love about this project is that they made the songs what the songs were supposed to be. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I needed outside brains to flesh these things out and turn them into what they were always meant to be.
Wow. So I mean, I guess
Those
I think
guys rule.
a lot of people make the mistake of looking for people that will more or less kind of just emphasize whatever they're thinking, or just go along with however they're already seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
And but really, I think where the magic happens is
Mm-hmm.
when there's kind of a triangle of interests,
Yeah.
and you all bring something else to really connect it.
It was awesome. And it was a practice for me as an artist to relinquish some control, but I went into it like actually with the desire to relinquish some control and say,
Hmm.
I'm going to protect X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to give you freedom to move however you wish on all these other things. And it was, like I said, just the best working team possible, because again, like what we brought individually was just made better, kind of creating one whole.
Mm. Well, I mean, I was very surprised and pleasantly pleased with Sweetheartland, and
Thank you.
I think it was a great album, and I am very excited to hear what comes next. Do you have any thoughts, any teasers you could
Yeah.
give?
Yeah, I'm in talks with a friend of mine. I want to do another album. I want to make it a little more singer-songwritery. So I got the rock and roll out of my system for now. And
Hmm.
now I'd like to maybe go back a little more singer-songwriter, but add a little more, a little more depth to it. And I think I have a guy who I'd really love to work with. I've been wanting to work with him for a long time. So we're starting talks. Nothing's fixed, but there's definitely motion into the next project, which I'm very excited about. A lot of the songs for this next record came from this songwriting group from this COVID time. So they're not COVID songs, but they were written during.
And I think in retrospect, people are going to be maybe even more interested to listen to what people had to say during COVID. Because right now it might be a little hard
Mm-hmm.
for people to
Yeah.
just constantly live in that, and they might be trying to get out of it. But
Yeah.
then maybe once this whole thing is over and we can get back to normal life,
Mm-hmm.
looking back on it, it
Mm-hmm.
might almost bring a certain gratefulness, I think.
It will, and I also think that it will be such a curiosity to see how different artists interpreted this time in history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you think back to the protest songs era of like the Vietnam War and
Mm-hmm.
peace movements and stuff, that was like foundational, pivotal work for
Mm-hmm.
artists who are working now. It's possible that this will be another like stake in the sand to say this era produced this kind of work that couldn't have happened in another situation, and it might send us on a new path musically, which I think would be great.